All right, welcome everyone. It's Monday, June 17th at 4:30, and before we get started, I have a couple announcements. The Community Futures has their AGM on June 27th at 4 to 7 p.m. And are you looking for members, Tony?
Yeah, at large.
They're looking for members at large, so if you want to get involved, you can attend that meeting or contact Tony Locker for information. As well, there will be an RCMP presentation on June 20th at 7 p.m. at the BCF from 7 to 8:30 p.m. And it's really important that those who are interested get out and come and meet our new staff sergeant, and as well our Greg, our bylaw director, will be there. It's just a time for you to ask a lot of questions, so hopefully you can make that. Again, June 20th, 7 to 8:30 p.m. So before we let's get going. And Julia, you are up on 2.1.
Yes, I am. So first of all, it's the draft communications plan. So this was in the strategic plan for council to have a communications plan. So this is the first draft. And what it is from conversations that we've had internally and we did an online survey about public participation and such. And so in it are 4 key goals, very much about what we've been talking about over the last year or so, about keeping residents informed, increasing the capacity of the town to communicate with its citizens, to boost participation in local government, and to develop relationships that bridge differences. So those are the 4 key goals that we've outlined. And then within each goal, as you saw, there's a number of objectives to meet those goals. And actually some of them we really are going for already, particularly having this as a full-time post and things like that. A lot of it, I really want to help engage the staff to be more proactive and to be more knowledgeable about things that are going on across the organisation. And also kind of support staff by doing some training and maybe doing a lot more planning about how. So if you are doing hydrant flushing, just because I know that that's happening soon, what do you need to do as staff? Who do you need to tell in the process? So just try and make it a bit easier and the information flows better. So those are the key things. So things like the app that we're going to be talking about in a minute would come under goal number 3. So it's about, looking at different ways of getting the messaging out. So really, I wanted to show it you. It's a discussion item. If there's things that are missing that you wish us to prioritise more. I've just seen a note for me. For things like in goal 3, we're already looking at creating a calendar. So when Public Works Week, so we always know ahead of time, Pink Shirt Day, all those things, so that we can be a lot more proactive rather than going, it's Pink Shirt Day today, we all need pink shirts on. And things like the campaign to encourage people to be involved in local government, go out to schools and things like that, get schools to come in here, maybe have a mock council. All those look as widely as we can at getting the information out there. So that's, I don't know if people have any questions. There's things that are glaringly missing or things like that's definitely not what we want to do.
Questions, Fred?
Well, thanks for working on that. It's pretty comprehensive. One thing I don't want us to gloss over is the fact that we still have a huge amount of people who aren't on the internet. They're not on Facebook, they're not on Twitter, they're not on the usual things that you and I would use to communicate what's going on. I think we need to set up some sort of a network and a sub-distribution that would cover the Pioneer Trail and the Sunshine Lodge and the areas in town that don't get internet, like Wayne. Those should be almost a subcategory that whether we have, when you do your
in disproportionate ways. I mean, even a 30-person thread on a discussion page is actually not a reflection of the population.
Right.
It wouldn't be escalated to the status of major issue in any organization that looked after 300 people, let alone 8,000 people. Yeah. And so I'm curious to see how all this unfolds, but I'm also encouraged by it, and I think it's my first read through. It's a really good roadmap for solving some age-old problems in this organization.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Tony?
Yes, very detailed there, Julia. I just want to comment on two things that popped out with me, and that was the internal staff newsletter. I think so that our departments are informed, everybody knows what's going on,
Yeah.
even if it's at a higher level without a lot of detail. And the other thing is the CAO updates and
Yeah.
the addresses and where we're at with things like the fountain, and, so that when they're getting approached with calls and inquiries, and so that they can kind of answer those things.
Yeah.
So yeah, two very important pieces there.
I agree. And, people come in to pay their taxes and then they go, but what about this, right? And it's hard for the people, particularly on the front desk and the ones who answer the phone if they don't know, right? So absolutely.
Lisa?
Just kind of like to echo what my fellow councillors have said. I like the fact that this is moving us towards being in front of the parade
Yeah.
rather than behind. That has
One day.
One
Lisa.
day. That's seemingly always been the issue in the last 9 years of service. And one of our past councillors who's sitting back in the corner over there was always leading the parade in regards to having effective communication, especially with the public, and how important it is. So it's nice to see this starting to come to fruition. So I'm excited to see how that will enable our citizens to be better engaged.
Yeah.
So
Perfect.
thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Anybody else? Christine?
Thanks, Julia. This is great. The one that I really liked exactly what Tony said. That one popped out to me because I've even been downstairs and people have come in for something and then turned into an hour conversation. So the one that I also really, really like is 4.2.2 about looking into how many different languages are locally spoken in Drumheller. Like we have pretty diverse culture here.
Yeah.
And I think that would be great that we're able to hit everybody that maybe doesn't speak English first language.
Absolutely.
So awesome on
Absolutely.
that one.
Cool. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right. Thank you so much, Julia.
Thank you.
And I guess you might as well just stay up on 2.2.
Yeah. So now we're talking about the app. So what you have in front of you is a request for direction. So I have spoken, as you can see, to 4 different companies. All of them offer some similar things, and some offer more than others, and the price range. So, and of course we have to put it out to an RFP anyway. So what we would like to talk about here is what exactly is it that council and administration would like to see in an app, because then we can use those as guidelines when we put out our request for proposals, because there's many businesses out there. And Tony gave me one that he met the other week at the conference, and I haven't even spoken to them yet. So, there's just so many out there, but if we know exactly what we're looking for, then that makes the decision a bit easier for everybody, right? So my question to you is, what sort of things do you want to see on an app? What are most important and things like that?
Tony, go ahead.
For one thing, I'm no techie, but I have gone through some of the proposal of the one we had in Quebec City. My flavor there, it's a local company out of Lethbridge. I haven't checked any of the references or not, but there's quite a few Alberta counties and towns that are on that versus what I'm seeing here was more American heavy-weighted usage there.
Right. Voyant is from Strathmore, but yes.
Yeah. As far as the tailoring goes, it can customize the app to us as far as logos and presentation, and it's even downloadable if we want to create a tour section. So tours comes to town, you can download our app. There can be restaurant sites to see any one of those things that are on there. A little bit about our town, calendar of events. Matter of fact, if we want, we can even apply for development permits and get building permits right off the map. So, I mean, the extent of it is as deep as we want to go. For the price, it's usually a group of 10 there, and that was just shy of 6,000, which some of these are almost double that. And then you can add on additional ones, and I did send you guys all out the proposal if you had a chance to flip through it or not. But you can even select an additional feature for $8 a month, so up to hundreds of applications towards it. So I think at the end, we want to find something that is local, that we can have technical support if we need it, that we can have ongoing assistance from people like this if we need it. They even step into the education piece for our residents. They have stat tracking as far as who's downloading it, how many hits are there, so we have an idea of who's using it, if anybody.
Right.
And it also needs to be a key link then into the communication plan and to Facebook and all of those interfaces that you can have access to. So this Lethbridge one is worth exploring for sure. But at the end of the day, we need to decide kind of what top 10 things we want, and
Right.
we can build it on later if we end up getting usage out of this thing. GPS technology, so if you're driving by a pothole,
Yep.
all you got to do is push your phone and does the location, sends it in. They're pretty robust apps there, and I'm sure some of these might have pieces of that, but I didn't really see a whole bunch of detail there. Just kind of got hung up on double the cost. So, yeah.
Lisa?
I got busy going through stuff, and I did have my hand up. So for myself, ease of use, like Tony reiterated there, is most important. Heck, I got my 60-year-old dad to finally get a cell phone, so definitely something that we want an older generation who might not be as fluent in that type of technology to be able to use. The main one for myself, I want to see something like, I think it's called a 311, like the City of Calgary. If you go onto their Twitter feed or you go onto their Facebook page and you leave a comment, it automatically pops up, please report to
Right.
blah, 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 and it directs individuals for more efficiency.
Right.
So that to me is definitely most important. Cost obviously is, but at the end of the day, if you're going to do something, you're going to do it right. So regardless, I want a product that will work when it's needed by the citizens of Drumheller or our visitors. And I like the recreation schedules. I mean, just trolling on Facebook, you see people, well, is the BCF open today? Or, you know, because it takes a little bit of effort to actually call or log on to the website. So I think an app that might have that type of capability or technology would definitely be a plus. So
Cool.
just
Thank
my
you.
few cents worth.
No, it's good.
Christine?
When I look at the matrix here, and basically everything that is written, so issue reporting, council meeting info, emergency alerts, upcoming work notices, upcoming events, recreation schedules, I think that we should have all of those things personally, and like Tony said, and more, because I think for visitors, even upcoming events and recreation schedules, if they can just pop that open, see what's happening at the plaza, and it's just like, oh, well, we'll just head down there today. But definitely the 311, totally what Lisa said, the issue reporting and emergency alerts would be awesome to have for our locals as well. So thank you.
Jay?
Thank you, Worship. I thought your report read a lot like an RFP. I wasn't looking for a whole bunch more choices, but at the same time, I understand. I mean, I think what Councillor Locker's trying to say was, you know, Canadian, Albertan, if we can do it in a way that makes sense. In this area too, I think, you know, reasonableness. I mean, if technology levels the playing field all the way across, that, you know, it's reasonable for the town of Drumheller to have the same technology as the city of Calgary. I mean, I'd be curious once the RFPs come in about the scalableness of these fees. You know, I wonder, you know, if the city of Red Deer is using one and they're paying $12,000 a year for the app and they have 100,000 people, why would the town of Drumheller pay $6,000 a year? Is that reasonable? So that's part of what I would like to see about the RFP process, but also something that certainly wasn't on my radar a few years ago, but is now, the end user agreement. That would be a big part of the RFP process, is to find out who do they sell the data to. Because of course we know that's the side business of every app company.
Right.
They might even make more money selling the data than they do in providing the app.
Right.
And so I'd like to know that so that we can
Yeah.
be transparent to the public about if they sign on to use our app. We want it to be user friendly. We want it to be something that works. But if it also tracks how they use every other app on their phone, we need to be able to make them
Yeah.
aware going in, right?
Right.
I mean, we were in Edmonton today and yesterday, and went over to a client of mine who's also a longtime friend. Just got talking on the side about our kids' cars. They are selling one, a certain make, a certain model, a certain price range. And within 30 minutes, an ad for the exact same make and model of car showed up on my wife's Facebook feed. And so and we see that every day on her phone.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of information I think that we now have to be aware of when we're seeking this kind of technology is what happens with what they collect. Yes, there's going to be reporting to us, but who do they sell it to, and why don't we get a piece of that action? Because it's our information.
Right. Cool.
Christine?
That actually reminded me. So that thing that Ryan was talking about when he came in, is that,
Geofencing?
yes, does that work with all the apps? So as soon as somebody comes into the valley, these apps can pop up on their phone and say, hey, you should download me or something like that?
So geofencing is not necessarily because you go and then buy that data from them, but I don't know, to be honest. I don't think it would. I mean, the ones that I looked at, all those and another one, you actually had to go in and download it on your phone. But we can always talk to them and see, particularly the tourist bit.
Fred?
Well, ditto for everything that everybody said. I just have a couple of notes that on the weekend when I was looking at this, to me, really important. I went back on the things that were important to me when I ran, and communication was on the top, and I think communication is a two-way street. I don't want to see an app that just vomits information all the time. I want one that will actually take communication back from the people that are paying the bills.
Right.
And so Brooks has a nice app where they can report. So I think that I'm interested in seeing what Tony's the Alberta app has as far as the two-way communication. And I'd like people that phone me. I mean, I'm looking forward to them phoning me more. But wouldn't it be great if they could say, "Hey, the sprinklers are been on for 2 days at the park, and just thought you should know," and just be able to beep that in instead of feeling that they're bothering somebody and not telling anybody.
Right.
So,
Cool.
thanks for all the work.
Thank you.
Tony?
One thing I did omit, and it may be extremely helpful, these guys did offer to come and make a live person presentation. And I mean, all of these apps are so in-depth. I think it would be helpful if we seen a general overview of what this thing can do, and then that may help us in selecting, we want that one, we want that one, we want this one. And the other thing that I did forget as well is the app is built in any kind of language that you want. So, I mean, it covers English to Arabic to Japanese to Korean so speaking to our communication plan with our diversity, again, you can download that in whatever language you want. So, but I think it'd be worthwhile if we got these guys on an agenda to kind of give us an overview of what's out there and what should we be looking at in an app.
Sure. I mean, with that because we need an RFP too.
Yeah,
right?
so Tony, I think you're putting the app before the horse in this case, right? So these guys are one of the, so I'll tell you, just give you a rough number. You want Alberta local companies, there's probably a dozen, right? So tying ourselves to one particular one early without actually going out, I think the idea that Julie is looking for is what's important. So if everyone said across the room that recreation scheduling isn't important to us, well, then that's not something we would include in the RFP. I think that when it comes time to actually shortlist the candidates that we're selecting through the RFP process, having a presentation at a community meeting or something that's appropriate then. I think before, it's just a sales job, to be honest. So I think it's better to say, what do we think is important that we want to put out an actual RFP for? And if it's those 6 things, I think, across the top there, then I think that's great. And if there's other things that that are extra value adds to it, perfect for us. So, yeah.
Christine?
Yes, definitely. I personally like those 6, and absolutely if they can switch to any other language as well, like Tony just mentioned, I think that would be a good 7th, in my opinion. What do you guys think?
Or Jay?
Thank you. Yeah, that's the one thing I didn't do a very good job of, Julie. I'm not looking for one that just sends emergency notifications.
Yeah.
I would want it to have the full meal deal,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So don't, as much as they're an Alberta company,
Yeah.
I think they're out of the running.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah.
Anybody else? Okay, so is there any other topics we want? Issue reporting, council, emergency alert, upcoming work, upcoming events, recreation and language? Anything else? Fred?
I think through your communication strategy there, you should decide who are going to be the point people as well. And there should be, you said there was you're talking about a directory of contacts and stuff like that. If we're going to have a directory of contacts, we shortlist that and figure out who's going to be, are we going to have council buttons? Are we going to have, where are those going to be directed to? And I think it's important that we have that kind of access, that people can find that easily.
And just as a sidebar to that, even we promised all these things on our community strategy, so I think for us as well is how we can manage the back end. It has to be really easy because there's me, right? So we need to make sure that it's easy to do.
Christine, did you have something else?
No, I was basically going to say what Fred said, so that I know that some apps don't want to have links and stuff on their app, their own personal thing. So if we can negotiate so that obviously Town of Drumheller apps on there, maybe even, I don't know if you want to get some local businesses that have links on there, if there was an area, but I think that's a discussion to have with the individual companies, because I think they can get kind of sticky about that, so.
Because Civic Web, they did, when we saw their presentation, they did allow you to, and that's linked with geofencing, right? So if you're in downtown Drumheller, and then they would link to the businesses and say, 5 minutes down the road you can go to the Napier Theatre and things like that, right? So that is what Civic Web did have.
Lisa?
Also, I'd be curious or interested to see if any of them could link to the QR codes that we have on our walking
Right, yeah.
signs around
Good idea.
downtown.
Anybody else? I'm just looking forward to them taking a picture, sending it to the department that it belongs to, and track the turnaround time of the result. And that's the reason I even took an interest in this, is I talked to the mayor of Brooks, and he said when they first got the app, they got hundreds of calls or contacts, but eventually they realized that the town was looking after stuff, so it slowly backed off. But it's like anything new.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be involved. So I think it's just something that would take a lot of pressure off of council as well.
Yeah.
And administration, because, the time that we take picking up the phone is a lot easier when we get a
Yeah.
text or an email. Fred, go ahead.
Just a really short one on that communication, Julia. That would be really super important to me, because half the people that end up writing to my private email can't get their email through our email. Like, it bounces back. So that would be really great.
Okay, anything else? All right, Julia, date time.
Well, how long do RFPs take then, Daryl? What do we need? September?
I think, if we bring it back in September, if we shortlist by the end of August, have presentation beginning of September, it's
Yep.
probably a reasonable time frame.
September 9th?
Sure.
Okay. All right, Julia. Okay, well, let's move on to 4.2.1, and Barb, you're up.
Thank you, Your Worship. The policy before you for consideration and discussion was prepared following the discussion in the recent motion of council when the properties that were affected by the fire was brought forward for tax relief. So, as mentioned before and during this process, we did attempt to find some examples of municipalities that have such a policy in place, and we were only able to locate 2 of them, I think. So this policy is pretty much modeled off of those 2 policies, one being the City of Red Deer and the other one being from the City of Edmonton. We tried to keep it really basic, which one thing we really did notice or came to our attention was those 2 policies that did provide relief. One of them, they actually wouldn't consider relief to the end of the year. Secondly, that it is actually relief only against the improvement that was destroyed, not against the entire property tax bill, municipal portion. And I guess if you've all had a read through it, just looking for some discussion before we bring it forward for adoption or consideration for adoption. And also under 6.2, I have highlighted in yellow the one community, I believe it's the City of Edmonton, limited the relief to $1,000 per property. So I just wanted to get some insight of councils looking for.
Thanks, Barb. Fred?
Thanks, Barb, for doing this. And I looked at 5.2 in my notes on the weekend, and I went back to it again and wrote it twice. So in 5.2, it says all property types. So, and that was my concern the night that we passed this forgiveness, is what happens when we have an apartment building? What happens when we have an industrial building? What happens if we lose a whole block? There are no, I guess if we'd put a dollar amount in, that's true, but this is a slippery slope, I think. We haven't defined, I don't know, does that include outbuildings? If somebody's garage burns down, you're talking about improvements, is that part of it? If a garage burns down, then we're not going to tax them for the garage as long as it's not there. Like, I don't know where it starts and where it ends. For me, it's probably there, but I don't see it.
Go ahead, Barb.
I think the secret would be in council would consider, may consider. I don't believe it's written as absolutely would. And I think also if you were to put a maximum per, it would certainly protect that. But then because it's a may consider, council would always have that authority not to, or provide limited.
And that was exactly my concern, is that we would be sitting here going, wow, I know it's the same situation, but we've done it 5 times and we have to stop it somewhere, and we have to make judgment calls. And I don't know. I don't know how we get around it.
Lisa?
Well, I just find it odd that no other communities besides the 2 that you mentioned in all of Alberta have a policy of this sort on the table. I mean, it's not unique to the town of Drumheller or Red Deer or Edmonton that a property can be lost due to fire or some other peril. So is that because most communities follow the MGA or follow the annual tax assessment process, which does provide relief, perhaps not on the first year, but on the second year after the loss of the structure?
I would be speculating, but I would suggest probably. And if we were to go back to insurance, insurance covers any additional living expenses, correct? So theoretically, any cost of is covered by insurance, even if they're not given the check for the property tax necessarily. Any additional costs are borne by the insurance company if you have insurance. I can only speculate otherwise, though, honestly.
Okay, so one of my concerns is because in my mind, I think that the assessment, even with the last 3 properties, you would see the relief on the following tax year, not this year. So if we implement this type of policy, we would be in essence providing 2 years of tax relief to a certain portion.
So, correct. And if you remember, it was administration's recommendation not to provide the relief because of that reason, being that the tax will catch up to them the next year if they don't build over this period. If it's not rebuilt in this year, the vacant land will be assessed properly, like it will reflect that loss next year, absolutely.
So on, if correct me if I'm wrong, I just kind of recall the city of Red Deer and the city of Edmonton. Were those not on commercial properties that they granted tax relief? I think the, was it Red Deer had on condo or apartment building fire?
Sorry. So it was the city of Calgary had done 2 special instances in the history that they were able to pull back, and those were both large condominium fires. The city of Red Deer, I didn't see anything specific to residential or commercial. And again, Edmonton, it has that limit.
Up to 1,000. Is there any way we could reach out to the city of Red Deer to see if they've actually implemented or what types of properties that they have granted
sure,
that relief on?
absolutely.
I'd be curious in that information.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I just want to say, like, you know, our administrative clerk did put a call out to municipalities as a whole, and those are who she responded to her. So there could be some others out there, or there could be some on one-offs, just like council had done recently. But so I just want to make sure it's not all exhaustive, because there could be some out there we just may not have heard back from them.
No, that's absolutely
Okay.
fair. Thanks,
But
Barb.
absolutely, we will contact Red Deer, and
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Anybody else? Jay?
Thank you, Your Worship. Barb, I think it's a great framework to start with in terms of the discussion. It's a draft policy, so of course there's opportunities for tweaking. I disagree with the characterization before. True or false? There is no guarantee that the current assessment model would actually guarantee relief if someone were to have a total loss early in the year, rebuild, and have a new home on their property by the end of the year. That would not be caught by the current process, correct?
Correct. If they have a loss during the year and fully rebuilt in the same year, there's no loss on taxes. Correct.
Right. So even though they could have lost the use of that property, it would have been uninhabitable the entire, or a good chunk of the year, just as we saw with this case, which is why we prorated the relief. The system cannot guarantee. And then in reality, if it was to wait till the second year for it to show up, and it had been unfair, they're actually now over the timeline. They would have no recourse under the current process to go back and have last year's taxes looked at. True or false? True, right? So actually this policy would allow us to deal with neither of those things happening. It would allow for council to have the opportunity. So I think what's really important is that policies like this one come for a vote, so that none of the, and don't think that the irony is not lost on me, but so that the process isn't aborted. There's no reason why that this framework with the tweaks. The only question mark is whether or not we want to add a dollar figure based on the draft policy in front of us. I agree. It should always, and it was meant to be only on the improvement, not a forgiveness of the land tax. That's certainly what was meant there to be. And I think, if we're using this as the lens of what we've already done as though somehow it's a cast in stone precedent, that motion that was made, that was passed, in hindsight, I think the fact that only one of the 3 properties had applied for relief, had written and asked for relief, that should have been the motion on the property that was requesting it. But that's not what happened. So anyway, moving forward, the fact that that's clearly stipulated in the policy would be a requirement that it's applied for in writing. I think it makes good sense. And I think the framework, in terms of, I'm not a big fan of slippery slope arguments, but the guiding principles in terms of stability and predictability of revenue, again, for the listening public, we were talking about a hit to the town's finances and an operating budget of how many $1 million? of $7,000, right? And so we're not even talking about 1%. And so if we're ever faced with, you know, a $30,000, $50,000, $70,000, $100,000 tax hit from the loss of a major supplier, then of course the framework for the policy allows us to take those things into consideration. So I don't see a slippery slope, not at all. So I'm pleased with what you brought forward. I'd like to see it come to the floor for a vote.
Lisa?
So I do have one question in regards to that part there. So supplementary assessments, does that not deal with a property that is in the process of being rebuilt throughout the year?
Yes, we do issue supplementary taxes in December.
So if that happens, then that would provide relief if the property isn't whole at the first assessment in July and then the last assessment in December.
Sorry, my brain has to just process what you said. So December, the supplementary is to catch any building progress that may have taken place between July 31st where it wasn't
Where
ready.
there's nothing there.
Correct.
Right.
And then, for example, if occupancy is in October, come December, they'd get a supplementary tax for 2 months worth.
Correct.
Did
So
that
it does
answer?
adjust and doesn't charge them for the whole year
Correct.
of that build on that property.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now I need to clear. So, something happens in March, and then they don't go start building till October. Are we saying that we have the ability to deal with March to October? That they still have to pay the land, like the school,
No, sorry. If the incident happens in March, the tax bill is what was issued. It would be the following year if they don't start building till the spring. So then on December 31st, that land would then be vacant, right, from the fire the prior year and in the March. December 31st, the land's vacant. The next year's taxes would just show the value of the vacant land. And then they start building again, say in March or April. Come December 31st of that year, a supplementary tax bill would go out if they took occupancy within that year. So if they started building in April and let's say 6 months down the road, they managed to get into their home again in October, they would get a bill for about 2 months worth of property tax on their improvement.
Okay, so is there no way that, like, these are so one-offs, knock on wood, that we couldn't have a special assessment on that particular property?
No, the only way we can deal with it is the way council did, by issuing a cancellation of the taxes in the current year.
Okay, I got to think about that one a bit more. Now, another thing that I'm kind of concerned about is, so let's say we decide to remove the taxes, and then the particular spot nobody rebuilds, and so could we not have something into effect that is based on a rebuild?
Absolutely, you could put it in the policy if you'd like to have that direction or that caveat, for example, put in the policy. You could have that as a requirement.
That's one of my suggestions. Christine, go ahead.
I agree with that. So I got to do the March to December thing now. So if we completely lose a house in March, and by the grace of God, somebody can build a house and finish it in that time period, because, I haven't done it. So let's say we get foundation or possibly framing in start. So do they actually tax based on what's currently on the property before then? Or is it like, okay, yeah, I've got some $100,000 foundation in, but I'm building a $2 million house. Like, how does that affect come December?
Yeah, my understanding is it's not on course of construction or completion, it's on occupancy. So when the occupancy permit is taken out and they're able to live in it, that's when it becomes taxable.
Okay, so then I guess I do understand that year thing, because to get full occupancy on a house, like build all that stuff within a year, is pretty lofty.
Okay, go ahead, Fred.
I was just going to say then, why wouldn't you not move in January 1st? Like, who would move in October, right? And pay taxes for the whole year? Or am I missing that? Yeah.
No, you wouldn't pay taxes for the whole year. So again, if occupancy
Prorated.
was in December, you'd get 1 month worth of, yeah.
Okay, anything else? Because we got to decide on this dollar amount. We got to give Barb direction as well. So we need to solidify this really deep. So I want you guys to give some input on that number as well. Or if you want it to begin with. Well, I guess that's the thing. We should give some direction here. Go ahead, Fred.
Well, my concern is back to, residential, commercial, industrial. If we don't put a dollar amount in, we could have a huge repercussion, right? And I know it's at our discretion, but I don't want to be the one that says it's free for you, and you can have it and you can't. If we're going to do a policy, it's going to be, sorry, the policy is like that. I want it to be fair. So I don't know what we do if there's a $5 million building that goes down versus a couple $100,000 house. Like, we have to somehow differentiate what kind of property we're willing to walk away from the taxes from.
Well, I'm just curious, this City of Edmonton $1,000 number, I know you might have to do some more research, but I think this is really important because obviously they got a bigger issue than they got way more properties than we have. I'm just curious how they came up with that particular number, and does that spread across the board for everything, whether it's a house, condo, manufacturing?
So to be completely honest, Edmonton's is a one-paragraph sentence, like one paragraph in their policy, destruction of improvements, and it reads, when an event takes place that results in a building being completely destroyed or damaged in a way that renders the building uninhabitable for the remainder of the current tax year, the prorated taxes and any accrued penalties to a maximum of $1,000 on the value of the building from the date of the event until the end of the year will be considered for cancellation. Any calculation under this provision will be rounded to the nearest full month. This provision does not apply to buildings that are voluntarily demolished. And that's it for their policy. It's amongst a bunch of other...
So it doesn't differentiate. Okay, good to know.
Other than it says it's at the sole discretion of the Edmonton City Council. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a hard one to yeah. Okay. Anybody else? We got to have our questions here because it's coming back next meeting. All right. Well, then if we have no more, you get unscathed there, Barb.
So did you want me to use a dollar value, or would you like me?
Go ahead, Fred.
I like the simple language of that compared to the loopholes of this. I like that. That closes us whether to some sort of a ceiling and qualification, and I could live with that. I could live with a simple
That one paragraph.
policy. Yeah, I could live with that.
Christine?
I was just about to say the exact same thing. I don't hate what Edmonton did. It still gives them the discretion of it, but then there's that ceiling. It's in their policies, so if somebody does have an accident, they know it's there. So, yeah, no, I agree with that, Fred.
But isn't that what I did? Sorry. I think that's what I did.
Yeah, and 6.2 is really just point form version of what Barb just read. Right? Just, if anything, it actually makes it a bit more clear that it's municipal portion only. So really, if the comment is just put a dollar value in there as the maximum waivable, really, that would be the only question to come back. But other than that, it's pretty much reading the same way, just a bit more in point form.
Christine?
Do we have sort of an average of what the properties in Drumheller could kind of come to in terms of the taxes and stuff? Do we have an idea of that so we can get a number?
You know, I think as Fred said earlier, it really depends, right? So housing might be $2,000 average for the municipal portion, but on your industrial or some of your commercial, it might be tens of thousands of dollars on the municipal portion. So, you know, that on a yearly tax. So there is definitely a big difference in, you know, in some of the structures. So.
Lisa?
I just want to reiterate that I really like that vacant land assessment will remain fully taxable.
Sorry, your button's not on.
Looks like it's on. Sorry.
Fred, you were also concerned about, I believe I marked 5.2. Was that one you were concerned about that? Okay, so you're good with that? I'm just making notes of any concerns. Jake, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think if the policy survives the process, then council can't be wrong. We were elected by the electorate to represent their views, and but I'm concerned about tokenism, and I wonder, especially when the people who complain about how much tax they pay aren't complaining about the $1,000 bill they have. And of course, we know that we're talking about the improvement and not just the land, and of course, there's two other portions to the requisitions that are not being waived. I'd feel more comfortable if the figure was actually twice that, but it still insulates the community. It still insulates the organization, the town of Drumheller, from a major loss, from a major industrial disaster, that sort of thing. But I think in terms of the maximum being around $2,000 reduces the likelihood that this isn't really relief. If someone's $450,000 property burns down, the municipal portion of their taxes will be far in excess of $1,000, and to cap out at that amount doesn't strike me as being fair. But I'd be more comfortable if it was $2,000.
Okay, anybody else? Well, thank you all for great comments. Barb, you got good direction? Are you okay? All right. Okay, well, let's go with round table. How about we start in the middle? Fred, you go first. I'm not going around. I'm going zigzag today.
Sorry, I have nothing. Everything's been dealt with behind the scenes.
Good. Christine.
I have nothing as well.
Tony. Jeez, you guys are boring. Jay.
Settle in. I have something. So it was my pleasure to attend the AUMA Summer Caucus last week in Ponoka, and that was the last of 4 meetings that happened over the province in the month of June. And just a few highlights. The update that came from AUMA leadership on some of the different programs and lobbying efforts. One of the ones that stuck out to me when I just wanted to double check, Daryl, when we were pursuing the information about the use of solar panels on municipally owned buildings, were you aware of and take advantage of the Municipal Climate Change Action Center at AUMA, that of Alberta Municipal Solar Program that provides funding for these things? Is that something that we looked at?
We're actually working on about 3 different programs that we're looking into right now. So I have been meeting with them over the last month. I've actually had 3 meetings with them. So we're trying to find some good fits.
Them
for us.
being AUMA?
No, MCC, AC.
Same.
So
Okay.
we'll have some news.
Excellent, thank you. And the new Minister of Municipal Affairs was in attendance very briefly at this meeting. So Minister Madu introduced himself and talked a lot about things. Certainly because it had been announced that day, he was promoting the value of Bill 7. And everyone will recall that's the bill that has been proposed in the legislature to allow municipalities they refer to it as a tool to cut property taxes for as much as 15 years in length in order to attract business. And I decided not to be the fly in the ointment and stand up and say, who asked you to do that? Because it was deeply concerning to me that this, who on earth could they possibly, actually that was my first question was, who on earth could you have consulted with in the month you've been in power? Certainly that sounds like something industry might have demanded of a order of government that is bent on serving industry more than I think individuals. But it's fair for municipalities to say, why on earth would we slit our own throats with our one true mechanism for generating revenue? And it really seems to me as a very disingenuous way to approach municipal governments when there's so much focus on intermunicipal collaboration frameworks, but at the same time will stab other municipalities behind the back with deeply discounting property taxes in order to lure business to us instead of them. And so certainly I think for major centers who may be talking about extra-provincial or international investment, but we already have this capacity. We've already come up with our own incentives. And to have this touted as a major tool, a major success, or somehow they've championed our cause, it didn't start off on a great foot for me. I was not impressed. The updates on AUMA's resolutions policies, just a couple of highlights. Everything is only for 2020, but when you guys go to AUMA this fall, expect to hear a lot of proposed changes about resolutions. The major ones being they're really trying to shift away. Over the last 10 years, it's been about getting the voting right, making sure those pads work, making sure people stay and do that, making sure that the resolutions get to the floor. Now it's more about making sure the resolutions are as good as they could be. So one of the proposed changes that's important and won't affect what we're up to, because again, this is 2020 changes, is that the seconding process usually happens in a rush on the floor. And so it's entirely possible that whoever's seconding that motion may have not even read the resolution. There's no requirement for them to have said that. And so what they're suggesting is that for every resolution that survives the process, and I think they said about 20 resolutions on average per year, and on average about 18 of them get adopted. And of course, because of that, that all generates a letter to the affected minister, that then generates a response, that then generates a subcommittee being struck again to deal with the minister's response and come about with what on earth they want to see happen as a result of that. So these are, and they have 3-year cycles. If there was a resolution that we saw in 2010 that was passed, it could actually just die and fall off the books if nothing happens within those 3 years. That's what happens to those resolutions. So they want to do a better job of making sure there's more follow-up, perhaps fewer resolutions, but more importantly that you've actually taken the time and found your own seconder before you send in your actual application, that you've got a virtual co-sponsor, and so that was an interesting change. Let's see. And they spoke a lot about preserving credibility of AUMA, and so I think that speaks directly to, certainly they have an editing feature, but there's going to be more focus on maintaining the credibility. If there's been some motions that have been made, some resolutions that have come to the floor that are deeply contrary to the ultimate goals of AUMA, and so they want to beef up the process to weed out some of the knucklehead stuff. And I don't have a problem with that. So it was interesting. And again, those are all 2020 changes. But listen closely when that stuff comes up, because none of it will be done without the membership agreeing to it, and they'll have to give you more detail than I would in a setting like this. Then the afternoon was spent on those intermunicipal collaboration frameworks. And it was interesting. I don't know how many municipalities. How many municipalities in Alberta? 400 and something. 50 of them have turned these in already. They've gone through the process and have submitted them already. And despite there are certainly municipalities where council's involved, council administration is involved. Some, a handful have left it all to administration. I think it's very clear that this is going to have to become a late add-on to the 2019 strategic plan, because I don't believe it is there. And these things are due next spring. So we need to have a meeting just about this. Because in the areas of transportation, water, wastewater, solid waste, emergency services, recreation, and other services that benefit more than one municipality, I'm not sure it's fair to say we know what we want yet. And that would be a very important conversation to have before we were to even think about striking a negotiating committee. I think there's been some hesitancy to prioritize us, as we are not inside any of the counties for whom we need to make an arrangement with, and they're busy making those frameworks with the communities that are inside their counties. But we need to be documenting all of our attempts to schedule these things. We need to be the ones reaching out, because when the deadline comes up, the repercussions for not completing this would be severe unless we were able to prove that we tried and tried and tried and tried and tried. So instead, we need to make it the focus that it should be, and decide what we're looking to get out of a framework, what we're willing to give. It can't be simply pay us some money. There has to be value that we can prove on the other side, and that we decide who the negotiating committee is going to be and go about trying to establish those meetings. So I found the overall caucus to be very, very interesting, and well worth the drive up to Ponoka. Questions?
If I have a question, so just more of a comment on your ICF. So as we'd mentioned a little while ago, that our goal is to get everyone together right after Labor Day and bring everyone. And we've talked to Starland recently and Nehill, and you're absolutely right. They're concerned about their little villages and communities that are inside the their own area. And I know I was at a CAO's meeting last week, and I felt we've got to deal with 5 municipalities, and felt, well, it's pretty heavy load, until we talked to a few of them who are dealing with 16, 18 municipalities through their ICFs and IDPs, because of the fact that the county's so large and there's so many little hamlets and other areas in them. So I think a lot of people are starting to get a little concerned about sort of that timeline with it, and I know certainly I am, with trying to get everyone together for September. So
absolutely. And the nice part is that, again, there's already a track to run on. AUMA has a workbook for these ICFs that includes all kinds of things, because well, I'm not going to go into the list of everything that's there, but I think if we use that workbook and went through it as a council, we'd all feel more comfortable that we know what we're talking about, we know what we're looking for, we know what a reasonable outcome of the negotiations would be. Because every last one, what they're going to be looking for when these are submitted to the province is that they are identical. That what we submit to the province is exactly what was done at each council table, and certainly while having an overall meeting to break the ice and start things going, we may wind up actually with very different agreements in part with some of these different municipalities that we border, but it doesn't change the fact that their council has to ratify it, we have to ratify it, and they can't, if we tried to amend it at this table after it was done, it would be rejected at the provincial table for not being identical to the one that we submitted, and the same thing would be for the other municipality who's in that agreement. So when it comes to time frames and how long these things are going to be, they're hoping that we're talking about a 4-year cycle that will actually bridge over the election cycle, but yes, in some ways these agreements will bind future councils to some responsibility. And so they should, because these are going to be reasonable things. So it's not a living document. Any change that would be proposed at any point along the way will require it to be opened up for both parties. Both parties must agree, and then it would have to be sent off to the province once again to make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. So this is a big deal. It's going to become a big thing that we do this fall. It may be the thing we do this fall from a council standpoint in terms of what's going to be involved. And I'm just not sure that we came into 2019 with knowing that this needed to be the focus it needs to be, because I believe they're due by the end of April. Yeah. And we know how quickly the year goes by.
Thanks, Trip. Lisa.
Yeah, a couple of comments. One, the center medians are starting to look fantastic. So thank you to the crews for putting out the flowers and more pots. It's definitely looking more beautified. And I like the fact that you can see more of the merchants along the tourism corridor seem to be taking an improvement in the appearance of their buildings and their lots, which is great. But I do remark that I think some of our residents in the community need to be following the community standards bylaw a little bit more closely, especially in regards to how tall their grass is tending to get. Must be because of all that new rain. But the other aspect I wanted to talk about or get an update on is the fountain. I just got a text going, is it not up and running yet? It was on the weekend.
So in regards to the fountain, there is another leak in the fountain space. So last year there was several leaks, and repairs were carried out to the limitations that we had last year. When we started up this year, we found that there is additional leaks. We've attempted to find them. We've repaired a couple, but the remaining ones we found, but they're embedded in the concrete slab, so we're unable to repair them. And the ones that we've identified are do not total the total amount that we're losing from the fountain. So there's still additional leaks, but we can't, at this moment, we haven't been able to locate those are. Because the fountain counts as a pool, because people walk in it and splash in it, it has to go through an Alberta Health Services permitting process, and they have to give us the okay to run it. So from discussions, before I go to the next step, so at present, the last period that it was run, and we measured it, in a 25-hour period, we lost 64 cubic meters of water, which equates to 68% of the capacity of the fountain. Disappeared in approximately a 24-hour period. So from conversations with Alberta Health Services, myself and facilities group, what we've got an agreement with Alberta Health Services do is to run it for a Thursday to Sunday night period, so a Thursday to Monday morning period, then shut it down and reactivate it in the Thursday, so that we're not pumping water continuously. There's a period where we're not just losing such a significant amount of chlorinated water into the groundwater table and wherever it's ending up. So for now, what we've done this weekend is we ran it for the weekend, and then we turn it off. We'll drain it so that it doesn't lose water. Then we'll refill it and turn it back on Thursday. That's the plan at this point in time. However, we wanted to brief council at this meeting to see if there is a decision by you or a direction from council to adjust that. However, at this moment, Alberta Health Services has agreed to this plan. If we decide to do something else, we'll have to have another conversation with Alberta Health Services on that.
Thanks, Dave. Well, I think, and maybe I'm not speaking for myself, but we need to have a serious conversation as to what to do with that for next year. And I mean, complete new plans. And I think we did have a brief discussion not too long ago where Kevin brought forward different plans or different ideas. And I think as a council, we need to sit down and get that. I think it's on the books for next year.
Yeah, so
Darryl?
we did, it's kind of a two-part, Lisa, where we have money this year to hire someone to design something. So, and the intent is what we had said all along was come Labor Day or the week after, like that's the end of the fountain as we see it. We're going to go in, demolish it, and then during that same period, we'll have designs done up, go to the public to say, here's some options about what we think will work there quite well, with the idea of bidding or tendering over the winter and constructing in early springtime, and have it operational, hopefully for this time next year. So
Perfect, because I hear more often than not that we just continue to throw good money at bad. So
well, and that's exactly why we're not doing that this year. So Dave is, we have talked quite a lot over the last 2 years about that. The fact that it is leaking a lot, and just it's really whether or not we just want to let it just go. And it's not like your car. Sometimes it just doesn't pay to just fix it. Just drive it till it's done. We're cognizant, of course, about water usage, but I also, and Dave and I talked about earlier, we're cognizant also about when it's 29 degrees on a Tuesday and it's not operational. Is that something that we want to see, or do we want to just run it and just, for the next 70 days roughly, operate it full time and then just close it down right after Labor Day? So.
Gotcha. We do have an outside pool though too. I think opening on the 19th.
20.
Or
It's next
20th?
week. It's
Next
next
week?
week.
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
Jay?
So forgive me, just for clarification, are you looking for direction from us? Because the unanticipated consequences of where all that chlorinated water is going, aside from the cost of treating it, the cost is actually secondary. The unanticipated consequences of what sort of erosion is occurring wherever that water is going. I'm reluctant, of course, like everyone would be, to see that attraction closed. But even over the period of Thursdays to Sundays, we're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of liters of water that we actually don't know where it's going.
Let me restart that sentence. So the plan that we've got, that I instructed Reg to implement last week on Thursday so that we could get the fountain up over the weekend, I think is the best compromise available at this moment in time of balancing the direction of having the fountain operate this year and also being cognizant of costs and environmental issues such as water conservation. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to continue monitoring the situation. If we find a void or a sinkhole starting to form somewhere, if we find more clear evidence of where exactly the water is going, we will adjust this decision if necessary. If there becomes a safety hazard because of a void forming or a sinkhole forming, then I will take the measure of shutting the fountain down on my own authority as a result of that. For now, my recommendation and what I've instructed my staff to do, barring a counter direction from Daryl as my supervisor or a direct directive from council, is that it'll be running Thursday through Monday morning and then shutting down and being shut off for those days. If council or Daryl override my decision on that, then that is their authority to do, but it's not what I'm currently instructing my staff to
I
do.
get it. I'm not looking to. I'm merely going on record saying sinkholes usually show themselves when something falls into it, not in advance. And so, what level of certainty are we going to provide people using that park and fountain? What level of safety can we guarantee that it's not going to tip on itself and fall into a hole some bright summer day?
What we don't know, sorry to cut you off, what we don't know, Jay, is that, so we put a water meter in there 2 years ago. Previously, we never had a water meter in there. So the downside of having a water meter is we now know we're losing water. We don't know if we weren't losing water before. So this actually might have been 2 years old or 5 or 6 years old, right? There's definitely, you can see some spots along the shore on the south side of the river that looks like there's water coming out. So I would expect that the water is going down and percolating out to the river. I am in completely agreement with you about the idea that I don't want to drive to work one morning and see the fountain tipped on its side like a flying saucer landing into the earth, right? So absolutely cognizant about that. And I guess that's where we're suggesting that running it for at least 4 days a week isn't going to be as bad as operating it for 7 days a week.
I get that there's a
But
lot
we're
of
still gonna have
unknown,
lots, yeah.
fellas. I get that. I guess what I'm really asking for is, this is not disparaging. I'm absolutely mean what I'm asking. Are you qualified to make that determination that that park is safe for usage when we don't know so many things?
Based on the information I have regarding that park and what was there previously, there are possibilities of where the water could be going. I mean, my understanding is it's the old Alberta power plant area. Not knowing, with the limitations of the knowledge I have, the water could be pooling in the old foundations. It could be pooling in the steam tunnels and piping that we know were left in there as part of it. So there could be areas where it is
Could be
safely
going to the lost
storing.
island of Atlantis.
Well, we're probably not that lucky. That being said, we know the water is seeping. There's a couple of locations on the river where we see the seepage occurring. And you're right, sinkholes do have a tendency under pavement to form when suddenly something drops into it, or under structures like a building when part of the building collapses. That being said, the park space, the ground in that park space, we're going to see if there's water pooling and starting to settle in those areas from our mowers and our maintenance in there. If a mower starts sinking into the ground, we're going to know there's water in that area, and that's where we'll know that's where some of the water is going. I cannot give you a guarantee that there's not going to be a sinkhole, and I'm not willing to say that. That being said, I do feel that this is the best option available to us that keeps the fountain in place and operating for this year.
Okay, there's your press release.
I think to add to that is we actually had someone come out to do sonar of the structure. So as we had said we were going to do, and the problem was it was inconclusive because they couldn't penetrate the concrete depth. Is that right, Dave?
Yeah, the concrete slab at the base of the fountain is 11 inches thick. So the equipment that we had available to the staff that we did pursuing the leaks and pursuing voids gave inconclusive data of what was underneath it because the slab is simply so thick it overrode what we were getting. The mass of the concrete kind of hid what was below it to an extent. From what we can tell, it's sound, but there's a lot of limitations on what we're able to do at this moment in time. That being said, understanding that we have basically 2 months of operation left, we have a monitoring program in place which we basically have because of our guys going out there and doing the testing and the sampling. We should be able to see if anything starts to go. If something starts to happen, we're going to get information about it.
Christine?
Are we not supposed to monitor what type of water we are putting into the river with the Red Deer River? Is that not how? If we're under such strict guidelines of what's coming out of our water plant, are we going to get slapped if we're just dumping chlorinated water into the river there potentially?
The amount of chlorination that's in the water, especially once it percolates through the soil, is very minimal. The amount of chlorine going into the river is very minimal. So it's no different than we routinely do backwash the pools. And some of that water, it was designed, you wouldn't do it today, but it was designed to actually flow to the river as well with some of that water. So yeah, you're not contributing to the deterioration of the river in any great extent by actually the water that's in there already. So one of the reasons you're chlorinated is because you're seeing the usage, but a lot of the chlorine burns off. That's why you can smell chlorine when you're at the pool or the fountain in the first place. So.
Lisa?
I guess just for the listening audience, I think some people don't realize that there's actually 2 chambers underneath that fountain. It's quite large, and it's not like a disc just sitting on the ground where people can think that perhaps it would tip. I think it would take quite a bit for a structure of that size and that thick of concrete to actually move. But that being said, and I realize you probably have taken the steps, but have we been able to get a system with a camera to go through the lines to see where all these leaks are occurring? Or
The attempts have been made, but because of the way the piping is organized under there, with the number of T's and bends in there, we're basically not capable of fully cameraing it soundly. We've done some cameraing, and we've done lining work last year, but right now we've got the best information we can. But the limitations of a camera is that if you come to a T intersection, a T pipe that tees off, it's hard to make that bend. And once you make that bend, if you come to another T or another bend, it gets harder and harder to make all those bends. So we have done inspections on the piping in the past to the limit that we're capable of doing so. I mean, any further, like the one big leak that we had to fix prior to actually turning the fountain fully on, we did what we could to camera down that line while we had it open. But again, once we got to the end, we got as far as we could go, and then that was the limit of it. So,
No, and that's fair. I've just heard a number of so-called certified plumbers say that, well, why don't you just reline the lines? So, I mean, what you said right there just explains it all. If you've got that many right or 90s in there, it's not exactly the easiest thing to do.
Well, and
we do have an estimate from last year on lining the pipe, and I have spoken to the engineering company that was involved in last year's work, and granted, this is I wouldn't say this was a budget level estimate, it's more of a concept level estimate. We do have some supporting paperwork on it from last year, but we'd basically be, in order to line all of the piping under there, we'd be looking at $100,000 plus.
Wow.
And then wind up with a 30-year-old fountain anyway.
Correct.
Exactly. Okay. Thanks, Dave.
All right. Just a quick update on the plaza. It should be going by July 1st.
That is correct.
Okay, just for the listening public, thank you for that report that you sent out. That's very informative. And I just want to make note that we have Roger Brooks coming June 28th to give us an overview of our community. And we don't have the time or date at this time or location at this moment. The date is June 28th. So I ask all of you that are listening, please mark your calendars and we'll get more information out to you. Anything else? All right, we'll call this meeting adjourned at 5:55. Thank you so much, everyone.